And good evening, everybody, and welcome to this YLAL virtual on understanding vicarious trauma in the legal profession. We're going to kick off right away and hopefully keep to time as well. So I'm Lucy Bowes. I'm a trainee solicitor at Hodge, Jones and Allen. I'm one of the co-chairs of Young Legal Aid Lawyers. And it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you all this evening to this important discussion about vicarious trauma and burnout in the legal profession with Rachel Francis and Joanna Fleck, who are the authors of this brilliant book. And a brilliant panel that you can also see, and I'm going to introduce shortly as well. Before I do that, I just want to mention that this event is being recorded and it will be available in a few days when we get the recording on YLAL's website. So please bear that in mind when you're asking questions. It will just be through the chat box, but we just intend it to be a kind of a general discussion and focusing more on the practical, and we're not intending it to be a forum to kind of discuss your personal stories of trauma. So just bear that in mind. My plan for this evening is to introduce everybody, hand over to Rachel and Joanna for a short introduction or presentation about the book. And then I'm going to put some questions to our panel. And after that, I'm going to open it up to you as our audience for your questions. And we want to try and make it kind of as interactive as possible. It's a really important issue for us to be discussing. And I think it's really important to get a kind of wide variety of views on this. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and I'm going to keep a keen eye on them. So we have Rachel and Joanna. Rachel is a barrister at One Pump Court, who are our very kind Zoom hosts this evening. She specialises in immigration and family law, and she is a former co-chair of Young Legal Aid Lawyers. And Joanna Fleck is a consultant, a teacher and a writer, and she is also a former solicitor and a yoga teacher. Many strings to her bow, and was also on the Young Legal Aid Lawyers Committee, and that's how I think Joanna and Rachel first met, and they co-founded Claiming Space and wrote the book, which I encourage you all to buy if you haven't already. Legal Action Group, who are the publishers, have very kindly given me a 20% discount code. If you haven't got your book and you missed your chance, this expires on the 9th of April. I don't know if I can see that. I'm going to read it out. LADSVT20, capital letters. So if you're feeling really sorry that you don't have your book yet, then it's time you use that code. It's a great book. Anyway, so finally, you're wondering who these 4 other people are on the screen. We have Emma McClure. Emma is a solicitor at Swain & Co, specialising in prison law, mental health and public law. She's on the YLAL committee, and she had her first COVID jab today. Exciting. I don't know if I'm allowed to share that, but I think it's great news. Danielle Manson is a barrister at Garden Court. Oh, someone has just got in touch saying she can't see the other panelists. That's interesting. Could anyone else tell me if that is the case for them as well?
I'd suggest that it might be that she has her own view on speaker view rather than gallery view, maybe, because I certainly. So Alice is saying to all panelists, I can't see other panelists either.
So maybe when maybe there's something that I need to do.
No option for gallery. Maybe Scott could help us. Is he still there? Has he gone? In fact, I can only see whoever's speaking. So maybe I can't see anyone unless they're speaking. There you go. So maybe we'll just say hello when you're introducing us.
All right. Emma, say hello.
Hello, I'm Emma McClure, and I had my first COVID jab today. I am very excited about that.
Can you see, did everyone see Emma? Okay, Danielle is a barrister at Garden Court, specialising in criminal law. She has a great dog. Sarah Lomry is the Deputy Legal Director
Hello.
at the Public Law Project. And Louise Hooper is a barrister at Garden Court, specialising in public law, human rights and migration. And
hello.
thank you, everybody. And I hope that when they've said hello, you can see them. Rachel and Joanna, can I pass over to you for a little rundown on your great book?
Yes, of course. Thanks so much, Lucy. We're going to do it as a tale of two halves, which is probably something to do with football, but I don't really understand the reference I just made, so I'm just going to carry on. But I'm going to speak briefly at the outset about how Joanna and I met and why we decided to set up Claiming Space, which was the precursor to the book that Lucy's so kindly been holding up to the screen just now. And then Joanna's going to speak to you a little bit more about the book. So Lucy's absolutely right. Joanna and I met on the Committee of Young Legal Aid Lawyers. So we're both like really excited, like children, that we're coming back to our roots. But yeah, we met on the Committee of Young Legal Aid Lawyers some years ago. And after some time elapsed, Joanna left the committee and I went on to become the co-chair of Young Legal Aid Lawyers with Ollie Carter, who I've seen on the participant list. Hi, Ollie. And just about the time that I was coming to the end of my tenure as co-chair, I was having conversations with Ollie about my concern, which was shared across the committee and indeed across the profession, that as a result of the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act, particularly, the focus of our caseloads was on really the most traumatic and the most kind of frontline type of work, clients coming in absolute crisis with their life on a plate, so to speak. And serendipitously, just at that time, I got an email from Joanna who was saying, I'm kind of exploring different areas of work alongside law, including in mental health, and at that time, yoga and more holistic practices. And I'm very concerned that people are leaving the profession. They're getting burnt out by this work and we really need to do something. And this phrase that sticks in my head very much, which I remember, and I think Joanna doesn't remember, is that, we had to do something about people crying in the toilets. And it was just an unacceptable situation that we were in. So we put our heads together and thought, what should we do? And we felt it was very important to set up an organisation that had kind of 3 strands of attack, if you like. So in the first instance, we thought it was extremely important to offer a peer support space for lawyers up to 10 years PQE, which we nicked as a kind of threshold from Young Legal Aid Lawyers. And so we set up those spaces in London in a kind of physical location. They're now on Zoom from October 2017. So they've been going for some years now. The second strand was to run training and to run training about self-care, vicarious trauma and burnout on a kind of wider scale to practitioners, law centres, firms, anyone that would listen to us and speak whenever we had the opportunity to in written form or orally. And then the final strand was to try and push towards a system change in terms of the approach to work and thinking really about how our work impacts us, how it lands and what mark it leaves and what we should do about that, because we felt very much that it was very important to be in the profession now for the client who's sitting in front of you when you're in court or when you're at your desk or when you're on Zoom for the nth time, but also for the client that's coming in 3 years' time. And Louise has aptly pointed out that this is a very resonant day for activist lawyers because Priti Patel is doing all that she can to make certainly immigration lawyers' lives very difficult. And that's before we even begin to talk about the extraordinary impact that's going to have on vulnerable clients. So that was why we set up Claiming Space. And I'll hand over to Joanna to speak a little bit about the book.
Thanks, Rachel. I don't necessarily remember mentioning crying in the toilets, but I certainly remember actually crying in the toilets myself. So I know where that line came from. I think we kind of had a sense when we started Claiming Space of the scale of the problem, but once we started talking about it quite widely, we realised that actually this was something that lots of people were really concerned about. And although there are plenty of people doing good work on this in the profession, in different ways and other organisations, there was a bit of a sense of kind of how we can reach more people, because, you know, especially before everyone was very familiar with Zoom, we were London based and we did travel around, but it felt like there was more we could do. So Esther at LAG kindly agreed to our out of the blue suggestion that we write a book for her. And we kind of had three aims really with the book. I think firstly, we wanted to kind of set out what vicarious trauma and other similar things were, both to reassure those people who are already experiencing and feeling the negative effects of those things, to kind of explain to those people who have an interest but maybe not so much of a direct understanding, and then also possibly to throw in like the key evidence and research that has been done to persuade unfortunately those people in the profession who are still reluctant to accept that this is an issue. We also really wanted to offer practical suggestions and practical suggestions for people to actually implement. And we also wanted to kind of spur more conversations in the area that kind of go beyond just the two of us. Like, you know, people will be able to hopefully take the book and talk about it themselves and make up their own mind about what works for them and what doesn't, what's helpful, what they might want to put in place in their own organisation.
Thank you both.
Esther is watching.
Thanks for the shout out. It's really sweet. Great. Well, as you say, the book is brilliant because it brings together the theory behind this, but it also sets out this blueprint for kind of how we can talk about this, and it gives you some really great suggestions about how we can tackle it. And that's really where I wanted to start. And with drawing together this panel, we've got two kind of more senior people, Sarah and Louise, and Danielle and Emma, who are more at the junior end of the profession, though with several years under your belt as well. But I wanted to kind of put to each of you in your respective kind of position in that seniority, you know, what role you in that place can play, or feel that you should play, or that others in that position should play in helping to foster more supportive working environments that are more conscious of vicarious trauma and the impact of that on legal professionals, and how more healthy working practices can be fostered. I wonder if I could start with you, Emma.
Yeah, sure. So sometimes it feels a bit weird to be called a junior or on the junior end of the profession. As you say, I've got a few years under my belt, but I am still on the junior end. It feels a lot longer than that because the work is hard. And I've thought a lot about this because, especially when you're on the junior end of the profession, you've already worked very hard to get your foot in the door if you've got a role in this area of work, and it can feel very difficult to rock the boat, to try and change the environment if you're already feeling very grateful just to be there in the first place. And the guilt of the fact that your clients are all experiencing direct trauma, and that's where the focus should be. But I'm also mindful of the fact that we are often sort of brilliant and dogged advocates for our clients, but speaking for me at least, I'm a terrible advocate for myself. But in terms of what you can do, the first suggestions are perhaps somewhat self-serving as a committee member of YLAL, but being part of something like YLAL and being vocal about that at work, I think is very useful in helping to foster a more supportive environment, because one of the main sort of parts of YLAL's mission statement is to help with the sustainability of the profession, and it's not sustainable if large proportions of people are burning out of it before they get anywhere. And obviously the book that we're talking about primarily today came as a result of two people who were part of that organisation. And you can take part in events like this and share them around the firm, and you can share the book around the firm and things like that, which is a sort of a less direct way of just trying, it's easier than going to the more senior members of the professional, senior people at your office and saying, this situation isn't very good, I think we need to change it. You can you can go about it in a bit more roundabout way like that, I think that's one thing I would suggest. One thing is join a union. And be vocal about that if you feel that you can be. I am a member of the Legal Sector Workers United, and you know, again, it goes back to the idea of being rubbish about being advocates for yourself, but I still think that that's one thing that you can help to foster a supportive environment, you know, to show the importance of making sure that we look after ourselves, and that's another way that you can do it. In terms of more practical things, there's stuff like we deal with traumatic material all the time, and I particularly deal with quite a lot of traumatic material, and it's important to try not to normalise that. So if you're dealing with stuff that is particularly traumatic and difficult and you're sharing it with colleagues, content warning it beforehand. You know, if you're sending something to someone that's particularly difficult to read or to watch or to flick through, then highlight that when you're sending it to them, so you don't normalise the fact that it's normal and usual to be looking at really traumatic stuff all the time, because it isn't. Yeah, I think that I'll stop now. I could go on, but I'll stop now because I'm sure that other people have some other things to say.
Thank you, Emma. That's such a good point about warnings. I feel like we probably all have a lot of stories about that and how that it can make a real difference. Danielle, maybe I can go to you next.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lucy, for asking me to speak. I think I accept that I'm junior. Actually, it's a year today that I had my tenancy interview at Garden Court, and for people who have heard me speak before, you'll know that I had quite a traumatic experience in terms of trying to secure tenancy. I did pupillage, and then I did a third six somewhere else and wasn't taken on. So when I went to Garden Court, I was not in a very good place, but fortunately sort of a year later, after having put in that application, I'm much happier. Yeah, a bit like what you two were just saying, there are so many war stories that we could exchange, but obviously that's not the purpose of this evening. So I tried to think about practical things that I could suggest, and I'll be honest, fortunately, the sorts of cases that I've dealt with so far, I actually haven't come across anything particularly traumatic. I haven't been instructed in those very, very serious cases. I mean, I know it's coming, and obviously I'll be referring to Rachel and is it Joanna? Rachel and Joanna's book when it's when that happens. But I think my focus really is more on healthy work practices. So I'm not sure if I'm Gen Z or a millennial, but one thing I would say about being junior in age, as well as my experience in the profession, is that I think we are very normalised to things being instant. So, you know, social media, instant messaging, things like that. And I think it's very easy for that to translate into work as well. So either for you to send an email and expect an instant response, or likewise for you to be sent an email and then feel the pressure to respond instantaneously. And actually, I think that's really, really unhealthy, because, you know, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that you're in court, for example, when you get an email. But I certainly sometimes feel like that email is like burning a hole in my pocket until I respond. And I think we really have to put a stop to that. And I quite often have sent emails to people and they have out of office on, but saying, I'm in court today. I'm not going to get back to you straight away. I'll get back to you, you know, as soon as I can. And I think that that's really good, because it sort of links into another point I wanted to make, I think, when we go on to talk about like techniques that we can have in the profession to sort of safeguard ourselves. And it's really just about communication, isn't it? If someone sends you an email and they know that you're in court and you're unlikely to respond, it just takes the pressure off a little bit. So I think that's one of the practical things I would say. Also, in terms of being like Gen Z, millennials, and obviously because of COVID, we've all been massively reliant on WhatsApp groups, I think, and sort of messaging people like that. And I suppose it's a double-edged sword. And what I want to say is I think WhatsApp groups are really great. They really, they're there. If you're in court, you can't make a phone call. You need to send a message to someone to say, guys, I need a little bit of help, or, you know, whatever. But I don't think they're a substitute for meeting people. And that's one of the things I love so much about Garden Court, that it was a really social chambers, and, you know, there were always drinks, or, you know, people arranging to do things. We had like crime team away days and things like that. And so I think whilst technology is great and it does have its advantages, actually don't forget, when we're allowed, obviously, that there's no substitute for meeting people in person. So I'm sure we're all looking forward to doing that as we come out of COVID. And then my last thing really that I can think of is about mentors. Now, the criminal bar in particular, is absolutely phenomenal for how collegiate it is. Like I've never heard of a profession that's got so many people who are willing to sort of, you know, scoop you up in their arms and impart their advice on you. And I've had so many senior members of the profession sort of informally mentor me. I mean, it's not through any mentoring scheme or anything. It's just, you know, they're all women, and they're women that I look up to and admire, and I've sort of fostered relationships with them. And actually, I think having one or two people like that who you can really go to when you're feeling a bit stressed or a bit conflicted or even a bit low. And I think because they're senior in the profession, they have a different perspective on things, and they can sometimes help you really level and bring you back down and sort of help you try and figure a way out. So yeah, shout out to all my informal mentors who didn't really have a choice, because I just saw them, liked them, and attached myself to them, and they haven't been able to shake me off since. But yeah, definitely, if there's someone in your workplace that you really look up to and you think, yeah, I'd like to be their friend, you know, just force your way in. And I'm pretty sure that you know, across the different practice areas, there'll be some incredible senior members of the profession who want to help.
Thank you, Danielle. It's making me feel really nostalgic about the days when we saw our colleagues. And I wonder if at this point I could bring in Louise, because kind of not intentionally, but beautifully, we have two people from Garden Court on our panel tonight. So which is unusual, but nice. And Louise, I wonder if you could speak a bit on this.
So when I was asked to speak, I said, I'm not entirely sure I'm the best person, on the basis that I'm old. I've been around for about 23 years now, cynical, and probably have been burnt out on at least one occasion in the past 23 years. And the work that I do is, generally speaking, with victims of serious sexual abuse and trafficking. So the emotional toll of that is one thing, but I don't intend to talk about that at all, because I think that's a separate issue to what we're really, well, I'm not the first to talk about how to deal with that. So that's for other people to do. But that work is done in a context of, as I said to the panel today, that of legal aid lawyers, young and old, feeling slightly bulldozed by the structural environment that you work in, by the fact that all of the work that we do is fighting the government effectively in terms of structural injustice, and that overlays the sort of work you do. And in terms of those things, it's quite important, firstly, for us to all remember that we're only seeing the edge cases, the ones that lose, the ones that go to court. We don't see the ones that win. But more importantly than that, it's about good working practices and engendering solidarity and working together collaboratively and supportively, so that we know that we're in this together. I looked at things like risks over and above those that are inherent in the work. And I think there are three in particular that I think we should be more aware of. Firstly, race, secondly, gender, and thirdly, being poor. Race and gender, I think, are talked about quite a lot, but in terms of being poor, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the impact that has on how you approach your work when you come to the bar, in particular. If you've got a large amount of debt behind you, you're more likely to say yes to everything that you're given, and much less likely to think structurally about the work that you should be taking on and where you want to be in the future. So I thought about a list of things that I think more senior people should be doing in their own practices, because that's what you then show and demonstrate to more junior people. So firstly, prioritise your health pretty much above anything else. I'm fed up of lawyers expecting a medal for going to work when they're not fit. It's not good for them. It's not good for their clients, and it's certainly not good for their colleagues. And don't encourage other people to do it either. Don't get dragged into an overwork contest ever. It's not big and it's not clever. Get a mentor, possibly from outside your organisation, so you can moan about your organisation and it not come back on you. And then more specifically, make time to plan, and not just your immediate work, but also your long-term plan. It's okay not to know what you want to do or where you want to go, but if you don't, then brainstorm it. And then plan out your work so you know what you've got in front of you and what your capacity is. If you don't know, do a study over a couple of weeks and then map it out. Did you do the work that you thought you were going to do? If you didn't, why not? What got in the way? And my guess is that for most people, you will underestimate how much actual time it takes to do a set of JR grounds or an appeal or a skeleton argument by at least 50%, probably more. And you'll probably find that you're underbilling as well if you do that, because you'll see that the work patterns are kind of consistent. Remember when planning your work to include your non-work commitments, like going to the dentist or going to the doctors, seeing your partner or finding one if you haven't got one, or doing the thing that is your hobby. Then review the plan and then amend it when you realise you've still underestimated the time that you need to do the work. And be realistic, talk to your clerks, talk to your boss. Take holidays. These holidays require you to turn off your phone and your email. And if you can't do that, leave your electronics at home. And this ties in very much with what Danielle said. Your devices don't own you, you own them. And you are absolutely no good to anybody unless you have breaks. Finally, and I ran some of these past a very junior member, a more junior member of Chambers, who I know is listening to this, and she said this was the most important. You're not indispensable, or God. There will be another lawyer who can do your job just as well as you can. And that's really, really important to remember when you're making decisions about things that affect your own health. So my intention is to try and put those into practice in the way that I work, because I haven't done that over 23 years in practice, and I think it's been really detrimental, and to try and sort of lead by example and suggest these things that I've learned along the way to my more junior colleagues. Thanks, and thanks for inviting me.
Thanks so much, Louise. I feel like that's so wise words that have been hard won over a lot of experience. Sarah, finally to you on this.
Thanks so much. I've just developed a massive crush on Louise. You basically, everything that you just said, Louise, I've been practicing for about half the time you have, but certainly talking to my barrister in court a few years ago, saying, yeah, I mean, I just can't shake this pneumonia, was definitely a low point for me. And I completely agree with so much of what you said. So in my own words, yeah, collaboration, super important, and it's really hard to not, you know, our kind of propensity to see ourselves as the hero of the piece, saving our clients, like saving, you know, the cause, means that we think that we are indispensable, and realizing that actually working collaboratively, working as part of a team, and accepting that you are not, you know, you are not the messiah and you're not the hero, is like it's an important kind of, you know, mental shift, because I think there's a lot in our world that tells us that, and getting over that is really important. I think about and talk about compassion. You know, we are all super committed people who put people above profits, and we certainly kind of, you know, treat our clients with compassion and demand that our clients are treated by others with compassion, yet our kind of compassion to ourselves is really poor. And like Emma said, you know, that thing of like, I'm a terrible advocate for myself. That's all of us. We're all like terrible advocates for ourselves, fight tooth and nail for our clients, but terrible for ourselves. And so being kind of bold about, you know, your own kind of welfare and your own well-being is super important. for me, I really like super cheesy, and I'm really good with it. Like I want, you know, I am the change that I want to see, and I talk about my feelings in work, which is kind of feels kind of a bit revolutionary. And I talk about my burnout, and I talk about having therapy, which I've had quite a lot of over the years. And I talk about the kind of the difficulties that I've had, and you know, I think generally we're all quite a funny bunch of people, and you know, getting some help and support along the way is a really, really good move. And as another lawyer friend said to me, it's just such a good investment. It's just a great, you know, having therapy is just a great investment in yourself. So definitely you don't need to get to burnout to kind of to make that investment, I don't think. I think also what's really important is not just thinking you're only a lawyer. Like I definitely really encourage people, particularly like junior people that I have the privilege of training, to ensure that they do stuff outside of work that's not just YLAL. Like, you know, YLAL is great, but it's not like that is not you, that you are not that person. You know, you are you, and hanging out with people who know you outside of the legal profession and who can take the piss out of you and remind you who you are is like so important, because this job will never tell you to go home. It will never tell you you've done enough. It will never tell you that you're brilliant. You know, it will never give you that thing that you maybe want, you know. And so just knowing how, and like, you know, I'm sure we've all done that thing already. I certainly had by the time I struggled to the end of my Law Society finals. I'd already, you know, like sacked off numerous nights out and kind of, you know, pissed off at numerous people that I really loved, but just like really just, and I think before COVID, I think I'd kind of got the balance, which was like once every 2 weeks or once a week, because I've got kind of, you know, childcare commitments and all the rest of it, I would do something with a mate. And that is like super important to kind of keep you remembering who you are. And I insist that everybody that I work with has 2 weeks holiday a year. And if I get emails from them, I will mercilessly take the piss out of them during that period, because like it's not okay, and it feeds into that I'm a really important hero figure, which is not, it's not right, and it's not right for anybody, and we must all kind of, you know, value that in ourselves and honor that in ourselves. And that is so important, to have a proper break. You need 1 week to unwind and switch off, and then you need 1 week, just 1 week a year, where you're just you and you're not a lawyer, and that is just like brilliant, and that's a gift that you can give yourself. And I think, and so just having little days here and there, you know, fitting them around the kind of great cases that you want to do just isn't enough, and it's not okay, and it's not okay. It's not an okay message to show colleagues, you know, and we're all, you know, we're all kind of mirrors to each other, and so like that's definitely not okay. And then I like that content warning. I mean, goodness me. Wish I'd had a few of those. No, I'd not. Certainly when I was training, and nobody talked about content warning. But another thing that I really don't like is people apologising for taking like 3 hours to respond to emails. And I'm like, on principle, I don't do it, because I think that like creating a culture where we're apologising because we're not responding to emails immediately is just bad news. I think that's me.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. I completely agree. And I find it really kind of, there's this grim inevitability to the fact that like when you email and you get an out of office, you often know that you will still get a reply. And I really hate that. I wish we could, you know, we're out of office, that's it. But yeah, it's really good to get these views from, you know, a little bit further down the line earlier on as well. And I just wanted to say what Esther Pilger has just put in the chat, which I think is really important. So LAG, Legal Action Group, very kindly offered to do a deal on kind of multiple orders. So I think if we've got any more senior people on this call, I wonder if it's more junior people, but you can also you know, lobby your bosses to get a copy for everyone in the firm. I think it's you know, it's a great book. It's reasonably short. It's kind of less than 200 pages, but it's very practical and you learn a lot from it. And I think, you know, everyone would benefit from having a copy. So yeah, that's a little plug, and you can get that 20% off, and I will stop doing the promo. I wanted to talk very briefly about kind of offloading during COVID, and whether the panel have kind of thoughts on this and how it can be approached, because I think in our line of work we do rely on colleagues and having kind of informal chats with our colleagues about our work. And obviously we want to be all-rounded people and spend time with people who aren't lawyers, but inevitably we do spend time with our colleagues. And I think during COVID that's been more difficult, as Danielle was saying earlier about, you know, we do a lot of things over WhatsApp. And I think speaking at least with people, you know, fellow trainees and paralegals at my firm, it's been difficult for us to kind of process some of our work during this time, because we haven't had that kind of way of just like letting off, you know, yeah, offloading to people who actually understand it, or as to, you know, to my flatmates who don't really understand. Does anyone on the panel have thoughts on that, on how we can deal with this during this time?
I can give you a couple of thoughts. I'm happy to wait. So it's really hard, and I think at the beginning of lockdown, I spent a lot of time speaking to everybody every day on Zoom, and then that didn't mean necessarily that they're speaking to each other, you know, people in my team. And I think the thing that I missed first about lockdown was my commute, weird. And then the second thing that I missed most was just the downtime chat, like you're saying, you know, the kind of walking out of a meeting together and kind of comparing notes, or kind of exactly helping to process stuff together, and then like hearing bits of people's work that you wouldn't necessarily formally, you know about, and that kind of like those lost opportunities to learn. So we've done a few different things. So we've got like a weekly catch up where we just share one piece of good news around the team, and that's just a nice way of kind of just keeping up to date with each other, you know. And then we do a brainstorming, which is to kind of like try and replace that thing of like going up to somebody's desk and saying, I've got this problem, and then somebody else join, oh, we don't know, get that person in, and sort of trying to, you know, work through it. So we do a weekly brainstorm on a Friday lunchtime, so that's quite a kind of relaxed thing, and people will often bring something there. And then we do kind of, I don't actually go to them because I don't work on Fridays, but then people take turns to host like Friday drinks. I mean, you know, everyone's so sick of Zoom, and it's so kind of such a kind of poor replacement. And I think that there's like, you know, that thing about like not like, it's okay to just phone somebody up to chat. And also it's okay to use the telephone, this weird thing called the telephone we've all stopped using because we're all Zooming each other. So like you can just call a colleague. And I do definitely make a point of sending silly emails, and, you know, and calling somebody or sending them a WhatsApp going, I can't believe they just said that, what's going on? Because, you know, we're still human beings. Those are my tips.
Thank you so much. I think you'd be a fun person to work with, Sarah. Does anyone else want to come in on this?
I just wanted to sort of lead on from what Sarah was saying in terms of we try to have, where I work, we try to have sort of regular catch-ups that aren't necessarily specifically about the work, they're just catch-ups, just to chat about anything in your feelings and things like that. And I think they've been really useful, but you have to make a conscious effort to remember to do them, because we're not physically seeing each other at the moment. So we try and make sure we schedule that regularly to make sure that we are doing it, to just have that offload time. And it's funny you mentioned, Sarah, about the missing the commute. So all of my clients are detained, and so pre-COVID I spent a very large amount of my time on trains or in cars, going to and from prisons and hospitals. And that's one thing that I missed and need to remember, is that I used to spend hours sometimes I was sort of decompressing from quite difficult and stressful hearings, where I couldn't do anything except concentrate on driving, and so that was actually a bit of a decompression time that suddenly has disappeared. I now spend all day, every day in this chair attending hearings, and then immediately my emails are in front of me and I'll just carry on, whereas I've had to be very sort of careful to myself and say, no, normally you'd be driving back 2 hours now, so chill out. And that's also sort of a tip that I would use. Try and remember that your productivity is going to be different now as it was before, and we're going to go back to that. So try and, you know, maintain a sensible level of you know, you cannot work at top level for the whole 8 hours of the day. It's just not possible.
Just before we move on to the next question, I think one thing that I would just add is kind of what I was talking about earlier about having mentors or someone senior within the profession, certainly for me anyway, who I can speak to briefly, but who always seems to manage to be able to just put some perspective back into what my issue is. And I think that perspective only comes with time, actually, and time in the profession and having dealt with a lot of cases, because often as a junior, you might look at an issue and become totally overwhelmed by it, be totally stressed, feel really, you know, like you've made a huge mistake, or there's a massive problem, or it's going to create a huge amount of work. And actually, when you speak to someone more senior who's got more experience, often they'll just get to the nub of the problem quite quickly. They'll say, oh, no, don't worry about that. Or they'll say, oh, I did a case like that. Let me send you my skeleton. You can have a look at that. Oh, you just saved me 3 hours, you know? So I actually think that looking upwards, because I think often the temptation is to offload to your peers, to people who are on a similar level to you, because I think maybe you don't feel silly or you don't feel embarrassed. But I think we really need to try and combat that and actually recognize that senior people within the profession want to help. And if they can sort of lean down and provide you with that reassurance, often that's what's going to instantly, I find, just make you feel a little bit better about the situation.
I come in on that as well, which is that the other thing that I found when I was talking to people who were more senior is that they'd put things that went wrong in perspective. So a couple of things that the kind of things that can go wrong, either something that goes wrong on a case, particularly when you're really junior, things often go wrong all the time, like your client might say something completely different to the witness statement that you've got in front of you that you then have to deal with, and it means your beautifully prepared case that you were clearly going to win doesn't win. And then the other thing that I was taught very, very early on by Frances Webber was, I kind of looked at her and I said, but I can't do it as well as you can. And for those who know Frances, she was a star of the immigration bar. And she looked at me and said, yes, I've been doing it for 25 years. If you could do it as well as I can, there would be something very wrong with me. And I think that's another thing that we lose from not being around each other and talking to each other.
I agree. Rachel, Joanna,
I've just spotted somebody's sent a very interesting question, which is very much connected to the themes that our wonderful panel have been exploring. And just to say, the panel is so great. I think most of you can only see us like in isolation, but there's lots of smiling, laughing, nodding, and very kind of, you know, bouncing off each other behavior going on in the gallery view that I've got. So I'm sorry that you can't all see that. And thank you so much to everybody for their contributions. I'm going to watch this back, especially Louise's manifesto, which was really excellent. So thank you so much. This person has said, I think because I spend so much time outside of work stressing about work, I end up stressing about my personal life in work / not able to compartmentalize and focus on the task at hand. And I personally really struggled to create those boundaries. Have any of you struggled with this, with the same, and how have you tackled this? I mean, the first thing to say is absolutely and all the time. And one thing that I found particularly resonant from the answers that were being given to Lucy's question just then was what Emma was talking about those transitions and shifts between tasks that were a natural part of the rhythm of our day and which have just been erased. And that kind of ties in with the comments that Danielle and Sarah and Louise were making about the need to have a balance in your life. and have access to things that bring you joy and are funny or are stupid, you know, and are not just this kind of grating attrition of traumatic cases. So one of the things that I've found particularly effective for me at trying to have good boundaries is making them part of my routine. So I'm very regular in the week. When I wake up, I do a little breathing routine in my bed. I try and do yoga at the beginning of the day, not a long one, as long as yoga with Adrienne goes on for, but that's usually about 20 minutes. I walk at some point around lunchtime, which is a very flexible commodity in terms of the definition of lunchtime. Don't anyone litigate me on it, because it can be from 10 till 4. And then at the end of the day, when I'm finished, I do a Joanna Flex special, which is to shake it off like Taylor Swift. So I dance around like a complete nutter, and if anyone could see me, I would be sectioned, but just to kind of like release the day. And I found that over time, the repetition of those things, which are actually all very embodied, helps me feel that I'm inside myself rather than just stuck in here. And they also don't involve screens, because I found it very difficult living alone, trying to kind of move past a task that's completely screen-based, like a full hearing on Teams for 5 days. And then in the evening, someone being like, you want to have a Zoom meetup, babe? And I'm like, absolutely, I do not. Do I want to watch TV? No. Do I want to read anything? No. Do I want to pick up my phone? Probably not, because I'm in loads of WhatsApp groups about law. So like having some embodied things, I think, is really helpful. Building them into your routine so that they're just like brushing your teeth. And then they give me certainly kind of mechanisms to try and relax through the day. Like sometimes I'll be sitting doing like, you know, ocean breath through my nose whilst I'm in a hearing because someone's really pissing me off. But they can't hear that or see that. And I've practiced it enough that I can do it. So those are some suggestions from me. I'm sure everyone else will have some as well. But it's very real and we all experience it.
Also, just on that point, just something that I want to say. I think it's really important for people to take ownership and not be ashamed of the things they do to chill out and relax, because there are some people that you know, wouldn't want to meditate or wouldn't want to do yoga and would totally like chill out by just like binging on Netflix for the whole weekend. Do you know what I mean? And actually, I think it's really important that we all just acknowledge that everyone has their own way of dealing with it. Like, don't feel like, so I'm like, I'm working class, like I'm from a council estate, you know, and like if I went home and like said to my mum like, oh yeah, I'd been doing, you know, yoga or something, she would be like, well, that's not you, like why are you doing that? And so I just think that actually one of the most important things is for each individual to find out what brings them joy, what makes them happy, what helps them relax, and then just do it. And actually don't be ashamed if you just want to like lock your phone off, watch Netflix all weekend. Like if that's what you want to do, then do it. And obviously what you want to do is going to change, and you know, you might try yoga one day and think that actually, yeah, this is really great, but you know, you might not, and you might just want to stick with doing nothing. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because I do think sometimes we talk about certain things as being like the healthy way to relax or whatever, and actually I don't think that that's right. I think that there are just so many different things out there. Just try everything and see what you like.
Can I go in? Go for it, Joanna.
I just want to say thanks to Danielle. That's really such a good point, and it's kind of why we really avoided kind of doing it like lists of tips or hints in the book, because like don't let anyone tell you what brings you joy. You know, we've all got our own ways of dealing with things, and I think if before the lockdowns the profession was at risk of kind of treating its members as little brains in jars, I think that's been really exacerbated by the necessity of how we work now. And just to answer the question from the question that Rachel read out, I think it's really hard. We're so used to, as lawyers, solving things with our brains and thinking things through, and there are some things that just aren't solved that way. And like a lot of what we've been talking about and people have said that have helped them have been taking care of the whole body and person and every part of, you know, our physical body, our spiritual, our social, animal body, like that whole part of us. And I think that's the way that we can't just kind of tell with our brains, tell ourselves that we have boundaries and that we have separation. It's like it has to be something that's experienced. So yeah, I'm a big fan of like just physically shaking and brushing off myself, but like finding ways to actually, it kind of seems, when I first started this, it felt a bit silly because you think like this can't really work, but actually you're kind of talking more directly. I'm going to sound very yoga teacher now, but if you can talk more directly to your nervous system rather than like your thinking brain, like the bit at the front of your brain, which we rely on so much as lawyers, if you can talk a bit more to your body, that's the way that your body's going to feel more secure and safe to kind of let go of the things you can't control right now and focus on what's in front of you. Like so much easier said than done, but yeah, just to echo that sense of like finding out what works for you. And that just takes time and practice and trying things out, and then making sure you reflect and see, as Louise said, you kind of have an idea of what might work, and then you check in again a few weeks later to see if it actually is working for you. And if not, just, you know, try something else, adjust things for you.
And can I just say on that point as well, I bought one of these, you know, these spike mat things that you're supposed to lie on, that's like supposed to be acupuncture. And honestly, I'm trying to work through it, but it's causing me a lot of pain at the minute. But I'm trying lots of different things. So it might be, you know, that I end up like being this big acupuncture person. I don't know. And then I will go home and my mum will laugh at me, but I am trying.
I just wanted to add, in response to the question, I will always remember when I think I'd already had 2 children. I think I'd already had 2 children and was working insane hours, and I started developing like very serious work-related insomnia. So fine to go like, exhausted, go to sleep, wake up like at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and then wouldn't be able to sleep. And so that was that was what was happening. And I really remember going to work and just being I've developed this insomnia, and I just wake up and I think about work, and then I start like dictating letters in my head, and it goes around and round, and I just can't get out of this kind of soupy work anxiety whilst lying in my bed. And the person I spoke to was like, oh yeah, I've got insomnia. I've had it for ages. And then I spoke to another person. They're like, yeah, I get that all the time. And it's like, oh my gosh, like this is like everybody has this kind of, like lots of people have this problem. And so the problem that the person with the question is experiencing, the kind of the bleeding between different parts of your life, and the kind of, like questioning whether you have good enough boundaries or whatever it is, like lots of people have that problem, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Could I? Two practical suggestions. One is make sure you have non-lawyer friends, because your non-lawyer friends really don't care about your incredibly good argument about an esoteric point of law, and they probably won't let you talk about it very much. And it actually comes down to making sure, I think a lot of this comes down to planning your time, because one of the things that I found is that if I don't plan my time, it just extends. So it's all about work, or there's no clear end of that point where you move on to do the next thing. And so then you feel guilty about the fact that you haven't finished the thing that you thought you were going to be doing while you're trying to do your personal life. And then you end up in this cycle of leading yourself into a situation where you're only happy when you're turning down social engagements because you've got too much work, because you can't do the work until you've turned down the social engagement. And that cycle is horrific, and it's really important not to get into it, because then you don't do well at either work or social things. And it's something that I've certainly struggled with. And I think the other thing that sits part and parcel with that is perfectionism. So when you pick your hobby and thing that you're doing to relax, try and make it something that you're not actually very good at, so that you don't try and be perfect at that as well as the job that you're doing. I recently took up painting. I'm not very good at it, but I have a colour wheel, which at least shows me how to mix paint. And I found it really useful to be doing something that I am not good at, I don't know how to do, and is not anywhere close to a screen.
Such a good point, Louise. I feel like we could all do with some hobbies that don't involve looking at screens. I've started drawing a tile a day. I'm only on day 9, but it feels great to have like started something, and it involves doing a bit of drawing every night, which is quite nice. We've had a question through which feels like quite a hard question to answer, but it would be nice if anyone's got some insights. And it is, how do we get men to care about well-being?
I would like to say that men do care about well-being. Like when we do events, training in workplaces, and our peer support sessions, and the people who've contacted us about the book, there are plenty of men who really care about their colleagues, and who have, you know, reflect on the impact of the work on themselves. So I think I understand the question is that, you know, this is an all-female panel, and that kind of reflects other similar events, I think. So maybe the question is how I don't know if there's an issue with men feeling able to speak up, or if it's men are affected in a kind of general way, men are affected in ways. But I think the main point is that I'm very certain they do care. It may be that, oh no, I'm going to say, I was going to say something very undiplomatic. I'm going to hold back on that. Sorry. We're being recorded. I don't want that.
Say it. Come on.
I just wonder whether there are some of the ideas about men caring about well-being is that historically the profession has been male dominated at the senior level, and that ties in with a sense that the senior level don't care as much, and that there are certain, you know, there are people, yeah, those two things coming together, that means there are certain people in the profession who we know get away, who, yeah, maybe more men than women, who get away with really bad behaviour and really bad treatment of junior members of staff, and that gives men a bad name, because there are plenty that care and take really good care of their staff. I don't know if some of the bigger personalities kind of outweigh that. That's as diplomatically as I can put it. There are plenty of men doing really good stuff though.
And I think part of the problem is, we know, don't we, that men deal with mental health issues, for example, very, very differently to women. We know that from the rates of suicide, and that, you know, that being the biggest killer of men, I think it's the biggest killer of men under 40. So I anticipate, not that I know, but I anticipate that there are a lot of men that are dealing with either vicarious trauma from work, or facing the pressures of work but not feeling able to articulate it, perhaps because of the stigmas that are put on topics like this. I suppose men may have their own way of dealing with it, perhaps, and this is a mass generalization, but perhaps through sport. I mean, I know a lot of, you know, men who, you know, happily go and play football or rugby on a weekend. That is something I won't be trying. My idea of hell, I would not enjoy that to blow off steam. But obviously a lot of men do that, and perhaps that's their way of balancing it out, so that when they start work on a Monday, they feel like they've had an opportunity to blow it off. But, you know, it would be, I think, helpful moving forward for us to have conversations with men and women that deal with this sort of topic, because I imagine that they feel just as burnt out as us, although obviously they're not, they don't have to deal with the additional burden of carrying children. I'm sure they're involved in childcare, but I think that's an additional thing that women have to deal with, that means we're probably more able to speak a bit freely about it, because, you know, when women get pregnant, that's one of the things that's at the forefront, isn't it? Mental health and being able to return to work and healthy work-life balance. but that's just my 2 cents.
I'll just say, as the person who organised this event, that I did try to get a male panellist on board, and as you can see, I wasn't successful for various reasons. And also, I think I just kind of struggled to think about, I feel like there's more women who are more prominent in this area and talking about it. And I just kind of struggled to kind of bring to mind men that I knew had talked about it before. And I know that this time last year, there was a really brilliant event put on by some very junior people at Doughty Street Chambers. And I think, yeah, out of the 3 sessions, there was one male speaker and predominantly female audience. But, you know, again,
can I just say in defence, I've got 2 guys who've come to PLP where I work recently, who are, with them, we manage and lead and have the privilege of leading the casework team, and we talk about wellbeing all the time, and part of their reasons for coming to PLP was, you know, one of them was certainly better work-life balance, and you know, is a massive champion for it. So it doesn't resonate for me that that kind of like that gender divide on it. I feel like once you start having those conversations, I don't feel like it divides on gender lines, who's willing to participate and who's not.
No, and I think they're really important. Sorry, Louise, go on, you go on.
No, you go, Rachel.
Thanks, Louise. I mean, I think the really important thing to say is that we are all absolutely clear that this is a space that all of us need to inhabit, however we gender define, however we're sexed. We should all be here and all having this conversation openly. There is no defined way, as Danielle put very much more eloquently than me, to chill, to look after yourself, to be boundary, to manage the impact of this work. And there is no defining characteristic that says you will or will not be traumatized in a negative manner by this work, and this space is or is not for you. Everybody's got to be part of the conversation. And I guess I wonder whether, being like a facetious, like slightly politician-y style lawyer, the question needs reframing to make sure that we are creating a space that is open to everybody to express themselves and the impact of their work on you know, in terms of how it sits for them. And there's been a comment made by Tom, which I think is absolutely true, you know, about the brutality that some of us experience from senior practitioner levels, you know, and from our peers and from the justice system and people inside it who are very traumatized. And that kind of leaves a mark on all of us. So let this be an open space and kind of the beginning or the continuation of a conversation that's for everybody. Thanks so much, Louise.
That's all right. I mean, I was just going to suggest that institutionally, one of the things that we need to do is take responsibility within our own institutions to make wellbeing part of the agenda, which might require mentoring schemes to be set up with the responsibility put on the mentor to contact the mentee and to check in on the well-being of their mentees, and for the more senior people to have peer-to-peer mentoring to make sure that they're being checked in on too. And then that makes it not so much a voluntary male-female issue or anything like that, but something that just becomes an expectation within an organisation. Rather than getting men to care about well-being, it should be a more sort of holistic approach.
Right, well, it is 19:34 and it's a Wednesday night, and I want to go draw my tile of the evening, and I want to give you all permission to go and do your own non-screen based activities as well. So I just want to thank my amazing panel and these brilliant authors for writing this book, and to you, the audience, for coming along. And yeah, I hope you all get your copy if you haven't got it already, or it's on its way, you can get it. Yeah, I think like the words at the beginning, at the preface of this book, before you sign up your names, Rachel and Joanna, it just says, "Let's get to work." I think that's a really nice note to end on. I don't mean work, I mean not work this evening. Yeah, I'm going to wish you all good night, and let's carry on this conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Lucy.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Hello. I don't know if I was the only one who left. Oh, we don't have Danielle.
We've just got a few people leaving now.
Oh. I wonder if I can stop it recording.